First thing I'm going to talk about is history and the relationship between NRCS and soil conservation districts. For those who don't know me, my name is Genevieve Lister. I'm the State Public Affairs Officer here for Maryland NRCS. I write news stories. I work on outreach. We do the contribute to the Maryland Conservation Partnership Press newsletter and other newsletters. We maintain the state website, as well as provide resources on the SharePoint, and work with farmers to develop success stories to talk about all the great work they are doing out there on the ground. So it's great to be here, and I'll get started. So if you're talking about the history of soil conservation in the US, you have to talk about Hugh Hammond Bennett. Many considered him the father of soil conservation. Early in his career, he was a surveyor for the USDA Bureau of Soils, and he observed how soil erosion really reduced ag productivity on the land, and which was the livelihood for the rural communities. So he launched a public crusade of writing and speaking about the soil erosion crisis, and he was one of the first people to really get this in front of the public. So here we are. Bennett led a public crusade about soil erosion due to decades of plowing grasslands into crop fields in the Midwest. You can see here on the right, there's a picture of a huge dust storm. So in 1928, he wrote Soil Erosion, a National Menace. And this writing influenced Congress to create the first federal soil erosion experiment stations in 1929. And then shortly after, the Midwest experienced extreme drought for a number of years, and the Dust Bowl began. So with the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, conservation of soil and water resources became a national priority in his New Deal administration. So Congress passed a Temporary Emergency Relief Act and established the Soil Erosion Service within the Department of Interior, and Hugh Hammond Bennett was named chief. The Soil Erosion Service primarily established demonstration projects in areas that experienced critical erosion across the country to show landowners the benefits of conservation. So for a little bit more about the Dust Bowl and the establishment of NRCS and SCDs, I wanted to play you an excerpt from an NRCS video that was produced a few years ago. It's called Hugh Hammond Bennett, The Story of America's Private Lands Conservation Movement. It's available on NRCS's YouTube page, or you can Google it. I think I put a link to it also at the end of this PowerPoint. So I will play. Please give me a thumbs up or something to make sure, so I know that you are hearing it. And actually, you know what? I better project just again. Sorry, 1 minute. All right.
Known as the Dust Bowl.
So on May 12th, 1934, everything that Bennett predicted in 1905 came true. One of the great dust storms occurred. From Montana in the north to Texas in the south, dust so thick visibility was limited to a few feet. There was a lot of concern in the Capitol, and a lot of bills were filed. And one of the bills was to establish a permanent agency called the Soil Conservation Service.
There was a bit of a tussle between the Department of the Interior and the Department of Agriculture as to where it should be. And President Roosevelt finally made the decision that it would be in the Department of Agriculture.
And there was a Senate committee having a hearing, and Bennett was invited to present the case.
Now, on that day, there was a dust storm which had come through Kansas, so they expected it in Washington.
Its arrival, I thought, might settle any senatorial misgivings.
But it didn't come as soon as he thought it was going to be, so he had to delay the whole Senate hearings. He'd made up things to delay it.
Citing a lot of data, biding for time. Some senators fell asleep, I think, but he kept on going. And finally, around mid-afternoon, the storm hit D.C.
And as Bennett was testifying, the room darkens.
And he said, we took a little time off and went to the window and saw the dust storm.
A modern miracle. One of the senators remarked, "It's getting dark." Another senator ventured, "Maybe it's dust." I said, "You're right, Senator. It's another dust storm." We went back to that table, and I was feeling pretty good.
The bill passed unanimously. Not one dissenting vote, establishing the Soil Conservation Service in 1935.
The first Soil Conservation Act in this country or in any country.
And Bennett was put in charge of it.
From Washington come U.S. Department of Agriculture soil experts. To prevent the spread of erosion, partially damaged land is terraced and contoured. From grasslands, sod is stripped and transplanted to barren ground. New vegetation produced by scientific strip planting gives hope to the farmers of the Dust Bowl.
Bennett and SCS leaders recognized that the work needed to happen faster on the land. They needed more local voices, experts who knew the farmers and their families and the history of the soil in their backyards.
Farming operations are not like a franchise where you might have one size fits all. Everyone's different. The local people know the land and the people best in their own neighborhood. So Bennett had it right by saying locally led is the way to go.
They developed a blueprint for creating local organizations to help farmers and ranchers called soil conservation districts. In support, President Roosevelt sent a letter to state governors urging them to implement the districts in their states. He expressed the need to take action to control erosion, warning that the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. On August 4th, 1937, the Brown Creek Soil Conservation District in Bennett's hometown of Anson County, North Carolina, became the first district to implement the blueprint. There are now more than 3,000 conservation districts across the U.S.
Bennett said himself later on that he considered the establishment of the soil and water conservation districts one of the greatest advancements in all of agriculture, because that did bring the landowner, the farmer, into the picture and really get conservation on the ground, as we like to say.
The districts belong to the farmers who brought them into existence, and they remain under farmer direction, and I hope will continue to remain so.
All right, so there you could see kind of the dramatic way in which Hugh Hammond Bennett was able to convince Congress to pass the Soil Conservation Act to create the Soil Conservation Service. And you could also hear his strong belief that there needed to be local voice in conservation in order for it to be successful. So this just kind of repeats what we just saw, but a good quote from Hugh Hammond Bennett: "National conservation action must spring from people on the land and to a large extent be advanced by them as individuals with the help of government." So that video, we just watched about 5 minutes of it, and it's only 20 minutes long in total. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to watch the whole thing when you have a chance. So SCS is established and the framework for SCDs is developed. So, what happens next? So some important dates for soil conservation districts. Maryland was one of 22 states that passed enabling legislation that same year, 1937, that President Roosevelt sent his letters. And a year later, Kent County was formed as the first soil conservation district in Maryland. That year, the State Soil Conservation Committee, which Jen mentioned to you all, was established to coordinate the work of the districts with the federal and state partners. In 1945, the Maryland Association of Soil Conservation Districts was organized. In 1946, representatives from 17 states created the National Association of Soil Conservation Districts. And in 1966, that National Association of Soil Conservation Districts put out a report that urged districts to kind of expand their operation, their purview beyond soil conservation, beyond water conservation, and to, include businesses, industries, recreations, and community interests, as well as agriculture in their programs. Some important historical dates for NRCS. In 1942, SCS established state offices and adopted the line and staff organization that continues today. Also around that time, they became the lead agency for technical oversight of conservation practices that were installed with financial assistance under the ACP program. In 1954, the Watershed Protection and Flood Control Act gave SCS permanent watershed planning authority, and that's when our dam work began. That continues today. 1970, there's big that around those years there was a big focus on the environment, just from the general population. NEPA required Soil Conservation Service to evaluate and report on the environmental impacts of programs. 1977, the Clean Water Act was passed. And NRCS began participating in a water bank program that provided incentives for protecting wetland habitat. That was kind of the first program that focused on wildlife and wetlands. The 1985 Food Security Act made conservation a prerequisite for participation in USDA programs. That Food Security Act is equivalent to what we call the Farm Bill today, and it included the Swamp Buster and Sod Buster provisions. It also established the Conservation Reserve Program. And in 1994, SCS changed its name to Natural Resources Conservation Service to reflect the broad scope of the agency's mission. So that kind of brings us up today, which Jen, shared with you in your presentation. In her presentation, we have memorandums of understanding and of agreement between our conservation partners. We work together to align priorities and complement each other's resources to ensure we're providing the best services possible to farmers and other customers. And a couple additional resources here. There's a longer documentary series called The Dust Bowl from, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. that PBS did that really goes into detail the impacts, the causes and the impacts of the Dust Bowl. The Hugh Hammond Bennett video that we watched today is linked here, and then there's a recent novel, historical fiction called The Four Winds, that follows a fictional family out of the Midwest in their trek to California, and Hugh Hammond Bennett makes an appearance, not by name, but by character in that book a few times. So if you're interested in learning more in a fun way, that's one way to do it. So that's all I have for, oh, and I think I'm right on time here for the history of this partnership.
Yep, good timing, Genevieve.
I didn't even practice that one. So next up, let's see, I think on the agenda, it
Was the organizational structure of Maryland Conservation Partnership Organizations?
Right. So Jen pretty much covered that in her presentation. So I was going to move into the outreach portion.
Okay. And that's targeting outreach efforts to groups in historically underserved